first modifications I did to the car were the clear turn signals in front, but you got to start somewhere. My name is Rob and I drive a 2003 Mitsubishi Eclipse. Bought this car, it was naturally aspirated, meaning no turbo, no supercharger, anything like that. A 4-cylinder, 2.4 liter, and I think they were rated at around 150 horsepower from the factory. And the first time I went to the drag strip, I think the fastest time I squeezed off was like a 17.1 or something like that. And it was a pretty embarrassing time. But you know, now that I've got the turbo on there and everything's running the way it's supposed to, the car's making probably closer to 350 horsepower at the crank, and I was able to run a 12.5-second quarter mile. You know, I had always loved cars since I was a kid. My parents even have told me that when I was watching TV, the only reason I was watching TV was for the car commercials. My dad was always a big car nut, and he has this old '88 Porsche 911, and it's got a manual transmission, and he had always told me that if I learned how to drive stick, that he would let me drive that car. I used to drive the Mitsubishi Eclipse in the Need for Speed Underground game, so that's how I started looking at Mitsubishi Eclipses. So I was a junior in high school when I got the car, and I just remember, you know, the first day I brought it to school, I think word traveled pretty quick because there was a lot of people asking like, oh, who has that car? That's such a nice car. And you know, I drove it the entire summer, and I brought it to school the first day of senior year, and I thought that I was going to be top dog again, but then there was a guy that was actually a grade below me that had purchased pretty much almost an identical car, except according to the car guys in my graduating class, his was way cooler because it was a V6 and it was lowered and it had exhaust and it had all these mods. So he kind of had their respect, whereas I didn't. And that was kind of my wake-up call to say, well, you know, maybe I should really start learning, you know, what's going on underneath the hood, and maybe I can get their respect that way. I didn't even get a chance to install the turbo while I was still in high school. So by the time I finally got the turbo kit, all the guys that I was building it to compete with had pretty much already moved on, and everyone was already ready to go to college. And it was funny because I remember I went to the drag strip with one of them, and my car was still stock, and I knew that the turbo kit was going to be done soon, but I went there because I wanted to learn how to do the drag racing so that I wouldn't make a total fool of myself when I showed up there with the turbo. And my car made it twice down the drag strip, and on the third time I tried to do a little bit of a burnout before, and I just blew up my stock differential. So we had to have the car towed home, and literally that night I got a call from the shop and they told me the turbo kit was done. After my freshman year of college, I got a hold of my friends, and literally there was only like 2 or 3 things left that we had to do to get the car running. So we put everything together and we hooked up all the electrical, and I tried cranking the car over and it wouldn't start. I started working with this tuner online. So he's like, okay, so tell me the modifications that you have on your car. So I basically told him like my injector size and the size of the turbo and everything. And he said, okay, well, try this. He sends me a file back, and I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of scary. You know, I went out into the garage and I loaded the calibration on my laptop, and then I sent it to the computer on the car and cranked it over, and it started up the first time. It was just the craziest thing because I was out in the garage using my parents' Wi-Fi plugged with my laptop plugged into the car, and I'm talking to this guy. He's watching my screen on, you know, a remote desktop, and he's like, wow, it's pretty cold there in Wisconsin. And I'm like, how did you know that? And he was like, oh, I was just looking at your intake air temperature sensor and I saw it said 25 degrees. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cold. So we went out. You know, the first time ever trying to drive my car with the turbo, and I just, you know, eased it through first gear, and then I put it in second gear, and I make sure that the car is going straight, and I just slowly roll onto the throttle, and I just hear my turbo spool up for the first time, and it hits the full spool, and both of the front tires break loose, and it's just pulling the car. It's, you know, faster than I've ever driven anything before in my life, and my friend is sitting next to me, and he's freaking out, like, okay, slow down, you know, like that was pretty quick. I was just smiling, just grinning ear to ear that entire night, and I'm pretty sure I probably got maybe 20 minutes of sleep because I was just so happy to finally have finished the project and be able to drive my own car again. At the beginning of 2010, I went with a couple friends back to the drag strip, and I was still having problems with one of my injectors, and I think my best time that day was a 14.1. And the very next time I went back to the drag strip, I dropped my time from a 14.1 to a 13.1. Yeah! Once I hit that 13.1, I was like, you know, that's crazy, because I think the fastest time that anyone's ever run with this stock engine before was like a 12.8, and I'm almost there. So then I just kind of like, that was all of a sudden my driving force, and I said, you know, if I change the tires on this car, I could probably break the world record. Man, it was crazy the first time I went to the drag strip on slicks, and it just happened to be like this super popular event for muscle cars. So just about every single car in the parking lot was faster than mine. And here's a group of kids that are chasing down this 12-second quarter mile when most of the other cars at the track are running 10s and 9s no problem. And I just remember just trying to coach myself and just say, just remember what you've been practicing. And I went and I did a burnout, and I pulled up to the line, and the light turned green, and I just did everything exactly the way it was supposed to go. And I got down to the end of the track and past the finish line, and of course you don't get to know what time you run until you actually go all the way back and come back to the starting line. So the entire time I'm sitting there just wondering, like, did I hit it? Did I get the record? And I come back around and I see all my friends that had come with me were all standing back by the ticket booth, and they were all like clapping and cheering for me, and so at that point in time I knew that I had gotten it, and I got my time slip, and I saw that my first 12-second quarter mile. I was able to set the record for the quickest stock internals third-gen Eclipse. As far as I know, it's still the record today, 6 years later. I've met a ton of people because of this car, just whether it be going to car shows or cruising Highway 100, and just the friends that were there with me at the track, and maybe I'd, you know, race a couple guys here and there, and then I'd run into people at a car show a few weeks later, and I'd have people coming up to me and saying, oh, you're the guy that owns that red Eclipse, like, you're the reason I turned my boost up, you know, I thought my car was fast, but then, you know, I raced you, and I was just amazed, and so, you know, those types of comments just always make my day, and I don't think there's any better feeling than that. Well, when I first bought it, I thought that it was definitely a dream machine. You know, I was driving a car that I had always driven in video games, and I thought that was really cool. And it's interesting to look back on that, because the car is completely different now than what it was when I first bought it, and it's so much better now than it was. So I guess it's one of those things where you don't really know what's attainable until you actually go out and do it. When I first started working on my car, I didn't even know which way to turn the wrench. But, you know, just through trial and error and just really getting my hands in there and just doing it, you know, I learned pretty much everything that I know now. When I first started working on the car, I was afraid to do it, because I was afraid that if I goofed something up that I would end up breaking the car, and I would have to pay some professional to fix it for me. But, you know, it took me a few years, but I kind of figured out how to look at a mechanical object and just look how everything is connected, and how to take something apart and put it back together. And I think it's just been like an invaluable skill for my life. You know, now that I'm a homeowner, I'm taking my dishwasher apart, and I can put it back together, and it's all thanks to wrenching on cars.